They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my Dad Fall, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Okie dokie, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to yet another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. James is along. Howdy, bud.
How is it going, man? We made it through 2 storms and we're ready to rock and roll here.
That's right. Yeah, we survived. Well, listen, Helene was heading right toward us, and then it decided at the absolute last moment to take a hard right and went towards Jim. That's not why Jim's not on this podcast, by the way. He's all right. He's, I think, at an airport traveling right at the moment. Yeah, it missed us. That's good. Did the second one hit you? You came towards you,
just the
didn't it?
outskirts. It went below us. Yeah,
That's good.
it wasn't bad here at all.
All right. So to close it, I wish we're not closing out October yet. I don't even know what I'm saying. So on this episode, I thought we'd cover a number of things. I decided I was going to bring friend Kevin on. Kevin, you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do, the voodoo that you do?
Yeah, sure. So, thanks for having me on. The hurricane, you guys were mentioning that. I got a friend of mine, a little off topics. I got a friend of mine that was hiking the Appalachian Trail in the middle of North Carolina, and he was there. So his hike was interrupted. He just retired from SOCOM. Did a bunch of special operations stuff in the military for years, but yeah, he changed his hike into relief efforts, and then after he went through North Carolina, he turned around and went back to Tampa to help with that. So he's his whole retirement plan of hiking the trail got completely upended by the hurricane. But anyway, so me. I serve as the Chief Information Security Officer at Rollins. We're a large pest management firm. We are global. We operate in a number of countries across the globe, multi-billion dollars. And who would have thought that there was that much revenue in killing roaches, right? So anyway,
I would. We live in the South. Yes,
I was
100% is
yeah.
that. Right. And it's interesting. Gary Rollins is. He's famous for saying that roaches don't read the Wall Street Journal, right? So it's anyway, it's been a good show here. I spent 20 years in critical infrastructure. Prior to that, interesting or not, I was an electrical contractor. So I'm still a master electrician.
All right.
Yeah, here in Georgia, and
I know who to call then. I need some outlets put in.
It's interesting how things worked out, right? Because and I don't want to get too much into my life story, but I left my mom's house when I was 17. I graduated high school. I was living in a tent, and I was trying to put myself through school and trying to feed myself, and at the time I was working for Forcecom out of Fort McPherson, and I don't know if that predates you guys or not, but I was attached to a bunch of MPs at the time, and did some, I learned how to scuba dive at the time. There's a bunch of things that come out of that, but we can talk about that at a different time. So, but anyway, as I was going through school, couldn't feed myself a part-time job, so I decided to start a little business, and that started. My very first contract was with an electrical contractor, and it was building out an automated estimating package. I guess I was probably 19, 20 at the time, and I slept on 3 different couches that week. And anyway, I got the contract. It was 4 or 5 weeks long, and as I'm finishing this up, the gentleman that owns the place come in and said, "Hey, dude," says, I'm in the middle of bidding a project. I need some help. Can you help me estimate this project?" And he says, "I need you to help me do a takeoff." And the guy's name was Harry Mitchell Blackman, wonderful person. We ended up being the best of friends. Very strong leadership mentor for me. He was very much my first experience with servant leadership, and just taught me a lot about business and how to build teams and how to get things done right. So anyway, all that said, he throws the plans on my desk and he says, I need you to help me do a takeoff. And his nickname was Winky. I looked at him and I said, sure. I said, sure, Wink. I said, what's takeoff? So he explained. I helped him. Before you know it, I'm helping with the business. That was, I guess at the time, it was probably 8 or 10 people. When I left him a decade later, and I had got started my own, sold the business back to him, and some other things occurred through that. But when I left him, we were about 200 people. 250 million a year. We did probably 60 or 70 Publix grocery stores through the course of that career. If you ever rode the Georgia Cyclone, that roller coaster at Six Flags, I designed the electrical for the braking system on that roller coaster.
No kidding.
Yeah, and was one of the guys.
I have ridden the Cyclone. Yeah.
Yep. So I did a bunch of work for Six Flags at the time, and I was the lightning protection that was on the side of that side of that hill. I did a lot of rock climbing and rappelling in my youth, and we couldn't get anybody to string the cable off the side of the hill, so I was in rappelling gear, hanging off the side of the Cyclone hill, stringing 2-aught cable for lightning protection. So anyway,
you took the long path to being a CISO.
I did. So it's call it. I guess having a misspent youth and an eclectic background kind of led me in this direction, right? But my strong suit was industrial electrical control. So I started my own business. I got my first university credentials in industrial electrical technology, and then I started my own outfit, and then Wink calls me while I'm running my own business, and he's, dude, I need some help. We're growing a lot, and so he made me an offer on my business. I signed a retention contract with him for a few years, and turned over my clients and that sort of stuff. And when I stepped away, I couldn't really open the doors on another electrical outfit. So I called a buddy of mine who was a network engineer at Check Free, and this was in 1999, I guess.
I remember those folks.
Yeah, and so I talked to my buddy, and he's like, "Yeah, we probably got a network analyst position." And I'm like, "Okay, why not?" So I went and snatched up a CCNA real quick, and I wrote I guess to back up, I wrote my first line of code like in 1978. So I've been around computers, pretty early on. But
that's been a minute.
Wrote your first line of code or punched your first line of code?
James. Touche.
Did you ever see the TI-59A? It's by modern standards, it's a scientific calculator. It comes.
I was gonna say I had a TI-85 in '82.
Yep.
I didn't have the newer ones.
Yeah, so this thing looked like a calculator. It was back before even LCD. It was an LED display that looked like the old calculator display. It had 4K magnetic strips that were the storage medium. It would handle 600 lines of code in volatile memory, and it was a complete Turing system. You just you programmed it in machine code. So I did a lunar lander when I was about 11 or 12. Where you punch in fuel and you got to land the spaceship on the moon and that sort of stuff. So
I love that game.
Yeah, so the same dude that helped me with that, he was he kind of babysat me and my brother's friend of the family. He was a chemist and a physicist. So I got growing up on the farm, I got introduced to STEM in a fairly unique way, right? So so my first loves were chemistry and physics, and then I built my own telescope at like 12 and just fascinated by science, right? And then anyway, so back to the 1999 transition. I went and interviewed, never working in what I would call an enterprise environment for IT, right? It was home hobbyist stuff. And the guy I interviewed with, they were looking for somebody on third shift, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. And I had a little money in my pocket. I took the money, I sold my business and bought a bunch of real estate, and that I still manage today. But, he hired me. And I was still flabbergasted that I got hired, right? Because the interview felt like I just bombed. And fast forward a little bit, and the gentleman that hired me, we're eating lunch one day, and I asked him, I said, his name was Dennis Wiles, and I asked Dennis, I'm like, Dennis, why did you hire me? Well, it turned out that he had worked in construction, So when he looked at my resume, he knew what he was looking at, and that was really fortuitous, right? I mean, the fact that I just happened to be interviewing somebody in IT that had a background similar to mine, that knew what my capabilities were. So I took the shift that nobody else wanted, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, third shift.
Can
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
jump
go
in for
ahead.
a second? Because I want to let you finish that story because it's interesting. But this kind of segues us a little bit into the conversation we've been having on LinkedIn about this whole hiring
Yep.
debacle, right? And people having difficulty getting through rounds of interviews and getting interviewed by people that don't actually know the questions they're asking, so they don't know
Mhm.
the answers to look for. And so the fact that you got brought on board by somebody that effectively had a similar background to you, so that, as you said, knew what they were looking at when they looked at your resume, that's super interesting because you didn't have an IT background. You just kind of wandered in. And to be fair, like all of us back then did. Like
Yeah.
nobody had an IT background because there's no such thing. Nobody
Well,
had I had a CS, almost a CS degree. I say almost a CS degree at that time. Like I knew what computers were, and I just got interested, right?
Well, I think, and you touched on something, Ruff, is that, and I think we've lost touch as an industry, right? Is that technologists are technologists. It's like I see so many
That's
folks
fair.
that are looking for the bullet point of, oh, you touch this technology, you touch this technology. We grew
Yeah.
up tearing stuff apart and putting it back together, figuring out how it worked. It's and that's what the resources still do today, but we don't interview that way, right? It's
That
like we don't look. It's and I've had folks ask me a number of times about hiring, and although certainly there are requisite skills you want to look for, but if I don't think about it laterally, and so I'm a hypocrite, right? Because of the same path I took. If I don't give folks that same fair shake at their capabilities, not their skill set, right? What's their potential? And so it's really boiled down to, I joke around a lot that I hire based on two very fundamental traits, and that's tenacity and intelligence. And I would argue that intelligence is optional given there's enough tenacity, right? And that
that's an
yeah.
interesting way of seeing it.
Yeah. So the fact of the matter is if you look at someone's resume, you get the picture, right? Whatever the prettiest picture they can paint of themselves. But when you're in the interview process, I don't ask technical questions. I ask about adversity. I ask about, hey, what's some of the most difficult challenges you've had to overcome? What's the time in your life that, because I know me, I've had a number of opportunities where I just felt crushed and felt like it was just the last week that I had to even chance at success, right? And it's interesting to me, some of the stories that you get. It's I was talking to a dude in DC one time. I was in an Uber, and I love that area. I used to go to National Harbor for a handful of conferences every year, and I'm in the car with a dude from Mauritania, and we had a conversation. He had a fairly strong accent, not that I don't, but we're sitting there talking. And when he moved to America, um, he came here with his family, and no one spoke. He didn't have any job prospects. No one in his family spoke English. He picked his whole family up and moved again. And I can't imagine the fear associated with that type of change in your
That is a
life.
brave. That's a type of bravery that few of us have to contend with, right? I know my parents did that
Yeah,
to pick up, leave the confines of your language, your culture, and go to hit a different country, different language with no sure way of knowing what's happening next. That's nuts.
it really is, right? And then I go back to Wink talking about the servant leadership thing, and you'll hear me as we get to know each other. You'll hear me talk about him a lot because I mean he's just he's gone now, but he told me something one time that when I was thinking about doing some investing and starting a business and that sort of thing, because he did very much the same thing when he started his electrical business, and he told me, he said, Kevin, he said anything that you desire, anything that's worth having is on the other side of crippling fear. So it was a very profound statement that I've carried with me most of my
That's a
life.
great statement.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like if it scares you, then it's probably worthwhile, right? And that's an interesting way of looking at things, right? So anyway, but so I got hired on Check Free, went up through the network route, got my CCNP, moved up through network engineering, graduated leadership roles because effectively that's what I'd done before. I was, what we would call a COO, a chief operating officer of a 250 person electrical outfit. And, so I changed the career, started back at the bottom, figured I'd see what IT did for a while. And then I got asked by a friend of mine, who was a friend of mine at Check Free. I met him when I started working there, a guy by the name of Bob Barnadoux. He was the CISO over at NCR for a period of time. So Bob, I've known since
I know Bob too.
Yeah,
Well,
so
Bob anyway.
Yeah, so we go way back, and we still talk pretty regularly. But anyway, Bob had asked me to transition out of network into security, and I was like, hey, why not? So I moved to security, and the rest, as they say, is history. I followed him to. Yeah, I built a whole bunch of stuff out when Fiserv acquired Check Free. I did some incident response capability. I did enterprise-wide incident management for a while. So I managed the delivery of babies in 2 company facilities. I've been on the phone, trying to recover assets from Eastern Europe. So it was it's been a really, really really good career.
So I got to ask, because a lot of folks have that kind of path, right? They're very diverse. I think it's about a 50-50 split. 50 of them go to security leadership. The other 50 sort of go, I'm done. And they take the exit ramp and go be consultants, go to the dark side where I am. What was your motivation for staying on the enterprise side, on the defender side?
Yeah, so I wasn't always here. So that's an interesting question, right? So if you think about what I did doing electrical work, right? That's very much a consultative kind of build, design build type situation without getting too much into that. And then when I moved to NCR, I had an unfortunate event with my family. And it's both my in-laws got cancer at the same time. We had a daughter that was in her single digits. My wife had to move in with her parents to help take care of them. I was in a leadership role working for Bob at NCR, but I had to make one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, and that was to leave working with one of the most respected leaders I've ever worked for. And so I left there and I went to a consultative role at a value-added reseller, Sayers, out of Chicago. It was a company started by Gail Sayers back in the 80s, Hall of Fame running back. So I worked with them for 5 or 6 years. Yeah, wonderful bunch of folks. So I was able to see really both sides of the equation, right? It was, coming out of leadership roles in technology into a consultative role where, I could see the perspectives and some of the gaps in that conversation, right? Which is interesting to me. It's like the sales perspective, the customer perspective, and really what I perceive as a disconnect between those two that still exists today, right? So anyway, when everything settled down, I had an opportunity to go back to building programs, which was what I'm good at is building, is identifying talent and building high performance teams. It's
a good talent to have, man.
Yeah.
Can I tell you that, James? I think James agrees with me that is a rare talent to have. There's a lot of leaders that couldn't lead their way out of a room.
Yeah.
Much
that was
less.
Actually it was a topic I was having a discussion with the other day with somebody about leadership, and it actually stemmed into the whole when New York started regulating, everybody had to have a CISO, and it's like, where are we getting all these CISOs from, right?
Yeah.
Like.
Or not.
So, well, and if you are, you're just pulling people that aren't ready, most likely, because we don't have that many out there, right? So it's a difficult spot to be in. So the more leaders we can get that actually are good at leading, the better. Stop trying to pull them to the dark side, Raf.
Yeah, right. No, and you touched on something, James. That's really interesting. Is that the fact that you're a solid technologist doesn't necessarily make you adept at leadership, right? And And there's some of that I mean, it's you need to have a little bit of both. I think that it's good to have that balance, but leadership, building tech, that is a completely different skill set, and it takes a different mentality, right? And not to pick on because I'm a lifetime nerd too, so it's like you get a bunch of us in a room. And I cut up a lot about, hey, you put 10 nerds in a room and we're all trying to out nerd each other, right? So it's we get in there and we talk about what our capabilities are and talking a bunch of acronyms and really that communication is between the technologists in the room, and we're trying to just and I guess it's almost like a little mini competition, right? And as a leader, it's as an effective leader, it's a very different mindset, right? When I'm in the room, I don't want to be the smartest guy there. I want my team to showcase themselves. I mean, I've selected really, really good folks to do the work. My job is to give them the tools, remove the obstacles, and get myself out of their way. And it's like it's so fundamental, and they can't seem to grasp that. It's like, and you see it with leaders too. You get a bunch of leaders in the room, and there's a lot of one-upsmanship.
Totally.
Toxic environments, right? And
those can get ugly quick. Listen, so because of the time of year this is, and the experience, the extremely broad experience you have, I'm going to have to bring this into the fact that it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? The one time a year where for 15 minutes you have to do your security awareness training and pretend like you care, and then you can go back off to clicking on every link and opening every file. How do you feel about what's your take on Cybersecurity Awareness Month and how, as an industry, we handle awareness, education, training, and all the things that would go to make us as a group better?
In a word, we handle it terribly, right? Because it's like, well, I mean, it's the test, right? That's the thing that and I won't wax philosophical on how I feel about just testing an academic approach to training.
Stop that.
Yes, it's just ineffective, right? Because I mean, people, they do whatever the minimum is to get them past the training. I think you're much better off making it interactive and immediate feedback. So, a couple of things that I did, when I got to Rollins, and something I feel pretty strongly about, is I don't know when my team are doing phishing campaigns, and that's by design, right? So, when I got here, the phishing campaign, our click rate was like in the single digits, and that doesn't align with industry, right? And I'm sitting here looking at it, and I'm like, okay, there's something going on. This is, the numbers don't seem to match up with what I understand to be reality. So I put a bounty on my head. I told my team, don't tell me when you're doing phishing. If you can get me to click, I'll give you $1,000. And when I did that, I figured out that I got a bunch of evil people on my team, and they're really
surprise.
Yeah, so I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't had to pay out the bounty yet, but it ain't for lack of trying. These the campaigns are really starting to mimic what you would see with an organized attacker, right? And we just made some investments not too long ago that they get immediate feedback. When somebody clicks on the phishing email, they are taken immediately into training around that opportunity, right? And I think that training in an ongoing way, real-time feedback, I call it touching the hot stove, right? If you walk up and you touch the hot stove, next time you don't touch the hot stove, right? And anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so I like that approach, and so I don't want to discount it. I like that approach. That I think that's got of all the bad ways to do it, I think that's probably the best. So there was a thing on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago where they asked the question of how do you actually, as a security practitioners and leaders, what's some advice you would give somebody that's creating a security program to make it stick? And And is it, you know, to reward them? Is it to punish them? And I think my answer was, and it's changed over the years, because you start out with going, all right, punish those idiots that do it. And you realize you do it too. You're like, oh, okay, so we all fall for it. So let's reward people for being vigilant and smart. And then you got to one up the rewards and okay, all right, fine. And frankly, the bad guys get crafty as hell. But I think I'm taking in a different direction. I'm thinking now, and have been ever more over the last several years, that the only way to make this this being security awareness or security sixth sense maybe is related to their family, their everyday life, their kids, you know, their bank account being cleared. If you click on this, it would clear your bank account out. The same goes for what happens at work, right? If you wouldn't hand a stranger your debit card and your PIN, well, don't give them somebody else your password at work. Those types of things that make it, because I think this what we're doing, it can be so abstract, especially for people that just like they want to, you know, whether you're an electrical contractor, whether you're a painter, whether you're a mechanic, whether you're building skyscrapers or a doctor, what we do feels so abstract and so far removed, so far out there, that I think the concepts that we preach get too abstract, and it's like, oh well, I don't have anything anybody cares about. Why would they? I've got $100 in my bank. I got $5,000 in my bank account. Well, who's going to come after me? Turns out everybody, all of them. And you gotta, does that make sense to you? Like to relate it to your real life, to your everyday existence?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect observation, Ralph. I think we talked a little bit about this in the context of my team just a few weeks ago, and that we could start doing something that gave folks tips to be safer at home, right? So I think to your point, one of the things it does right out of the gate is really helps with the common language, right? Because anytime you're trying to communicate a topic that's as complex as cyber, you got to arrive at a common language somehow. And I think that focusing on what folks do in their day-to-day lives, not their work lives, would be beneficial in that respect. I think that if it's something they can relate to, I think to the point you're making, something they can relate to right away, then it will stick. They'll remember, right? Because there's a system that they have to draw a correlation. There's actually thought that goes into that. And those are the things that help us retain. I know, for me, it generally takes about 3 times of the topic, right? I touch on it once, twice, third time.
That feels about right.
Yeah. So, and I think everyone, or most of us, that aren't exceptionally gifted in that area, would have a similar issue. So I think that's a great observation, is that maybe we take those simpler concepts that folks would do at home and then kind of translate those back to enterprise, right?
I think you get some of that, like some of that works. And we've been talking about that for a long time, actually, for, make it personable. How do you tie it back to what you're doing at home? The problem I think we see is that what's at home is very, I can relate to what's at home at my situation, right? I know what's going to happen if somebody breaks into my house. I know what I'm losing. I know what happens if they get into my bank account or doesn't. I don't know what that looks like from a business. When it's me sitting in my organization, okay, I put my credentials into this thing. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means somebody got access to billions of records or they got my email. It's hard for people to really understand the effect of what has happened when you're in the organization. I can sit there and tell you all day what's going to happen, personally, if you were to give up your personal credentials, right? And we can talk about the types of attacks coming, but they're different, right? The phishing email I'm going to fall for at home is completely different than the phishing email I'm going to fall for at work, right? Because if I'm the controller at work, I'm getting emails related to payroll and I'm getting emails related to transferring money. I'm probably not getting those at home. I think it's a combination of that stuff, right? To me, I've always been if you're aware of something, you remember it, right? It's that subliminal messaging type of thing that if I tell you a story about another finance person or payroll person sending out W-2 information outside the company, then you'll remember that and you'll say, oh, that's how somebody comes at me. I'm going to see that next time I come in. If I never tell you that and I still tell you at home, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, as soon as you get that from the fake CEO that says, send me all your money, you're like, okay, I'll do it, right? And the more we can show role-specific instances, I think really helps out that, hey, this is the type. Because I mean, we get phishing emails at work, right? And when there's something, I got one the other day and it was so dumb about somebody from, I guess I went to school with. Yeah, I don't talk to anybody I went to school with. So that phishing email immediately went, and none of them know where I work. So like, why would you email me there? You know what I mean? Like, you can pick some of those out, but trying to figure out that relevance. But I mean, I'm with you, Raph, on if you can make it like this isn't just a work thing, this is a you thing.
Yeah.
But then still be able to kind of distinguish what it's going to look like at home versus what it's going to look like here, and trying to help people understand that they're not a nobody in the organization, right? Their identity means something to the org, but how do you quantify it? And I think, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I think you touched on a couple of things, right? So if I were to put that in a word, it's training with context, right? And so if I think about the accountant, at home, it applies to really everyone that has their home router, so they can relate, and it's something personal. They get back to work, we have to somehow marry the context of their role to the training, and we do that. We do that to some degree. When I say we, I mean the industry. Like if you think about developers, right, and you think about some of the regulatory compulsions associated with training there, require specific training for developers around secure coding, right? And so there's there are trainings out there that have some of that in context. I think the challenge, as I think about it, may be just the economy of the whole thing, right? I mean, if I sit down and create accounting specific training, then there's development cycles that go into that have a cost, right? Now over time, that cost diminishes because you get to reuse it, right? It continues to go down and down and down the more you have folks consume it. But how do you market that? Do you make it, do you build a bunch of specific modules inside of training for different roles in a corporate organization, an enterprise that that has that context? And is that worthwhile financially? I think that's probably my first thought would be that I don't think that concept would be lost on anyone. I think the struggle would be figuring out how to make money getting that detailed with your training. Right?
That's entirely fair.
Can you do it though? Versus, because when we talk about like Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? It's the 1 month you had mentioned earlier, right? The ongoing stuff. I'm not a month fan. Okay, doesn't matter what month it is. I'm not a fan of it. But if you turn it more into kind of like a threat intel type of thing, right? So, okay, I'm security. I mean, I look through my news feeds every morning. I'm looking for different things, whether it's developer related, whether it's infrastructure related, right? If I know it touches tools that we have, then I'm looking at it and I might reach out to the team. Like I'm writing out to the DevOps team, hey, is this something that we need to be concerned about? Read this article. Can we not? We could do that with finance. We could do it with payroll. We could do it with, like, you can expand that out to where it's not a once a year, or it's not a module. It is a, hey, look, I have a standing relationship. When I come across something that I think relates, like, hey, this is a new attack vector against payroll right now. I'm going to spark a conversation. I'm going to open up a Teams chat, talk to the payroll people and say, hey, just so you know, this is happening, right? It falls back on that awareness piece. I get it makes it more difficult to track it so we can show 100% completion of the training, but you're creating now an open forum for people to communicate back and forth about it versus saying, oh, this has to be some module out in Cornerstone that people have to go through every year that don't look at it anyway. They look at it long enough to be able to click through the buttons so they can get through it. Well, you know what I mean?
And you just hit upon my big pet peeve is it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And as I said at the beginning, like, we bring this up for a couple minutes a year, did we force them to go sit through a terrible video, take a short test, and off they go? And it doesn't stick. There's no, as you said, James, relationship there. Kevin, do you have, from a resources perspective, would you have, is that, because that feels like something you'd have to almost dedicate at least somebody part-time to, like what James was saying, constant contact, continuous reminders, and show, you know, kind of a program much like vulnerability management. It doesn't have, like, you don't do vulnerability management once a year. You do it every day, right? You do. So security awareness should be an everyday task. Is that become resource constrictive for you then?
So yeah, so I look at that, and I even put it in a bigger umbrella than just that, Rob. Is I call that evangelizing the security program, right? Is that if I don't have a specific need to communicate with someone, opening those channels is really about, I think, to the point that James, at least the way I understood it, James, is it just make sure you maintain a dialogue, right? Is that and just make sure that when folks do experience an opportunity, that they know to pick up the phone and call you and have a discussion about it. And I think that I think there's a couple of opportunities with that. Is that with too much stick, not enough carrot, people tend to not want to pick up the telephone. It's like you kind of you kind of walk that tightrope. I'm of the mind that depending on the scale of a loss, right, is that if someone does get caught and it's call it a really inexpensive education, right? I think the organization benefits much more by retaining that individual, because there's a pretty high chance they are not going to do it again. And
we should have people doing some sort of threat intelligence, right? I mean, usually it's very technical, but you could expand that out in your industry, or everybody has like a payroll, or these other legal sides, all that stuff. But it's not, to me, I don't see it as like that full time. I mean, like I said, I have my RSS feeds that come through every morning. Part of my morning routine is, as I'm eating breakfast, I'm going through my feeds, right? I see something, it's like, oh, you know what, the DevOps might find this interesting. I'm going to share this with DevOps today, and we'll have a quick, and I've actually found like they're actually really receptive, like, hey, thanks for sharing this. I don't think this is an issue for us, but we'll double check, but it's not a daily or even a monthly that I'm sending something to them, right? It is that true check-in almost of, hey, I just happened to see this is something trending, or and this is your realm, but I want to bring you into it, instead of threat intel being just the security team and us talking about it, and then we go behind the scenes and we check, did we do this, do we do that? It's like, hey, why don't we reach out to the people that actually are doing this and let them know this is the trend, or a new Office thing is going around, like, hey, this is how people are getting popped. Do we send that to our like actual users? No. We look at it and say, do we have something that blocks HTML attachments? Do we have something that does this? We don't say, hey, everybody, here's an email that's going around. Be cautious if you see it, right? We don't give any heads up for that. But if we had that random, this is it, like that check-in, like people feel connected to what we're doing, instead of us trying to do it all behind the scenes and hope that they won't click on, but they never saw that scenario. They don't understand it.
And James, that's interesting. So I say a lot of times that at least to tell my team, is that when we're talking with our internal customers, let's try to keep the perspective that we're doing something with them, doing something for them, not doing something to them. Right. We do a number of things that you touched on. So we've got a newsletter that we send out on a regular cadence, and we always put something around cyber in that newsletter. I've got a quarterly committee that that I co-chair with our legal department, that we talk about current events, happenings, and in privacy, what the legislative landscape may look like, the things that we're concerned about, those types of things. And that's mostly around leadership, but it's all groups, in the company. So we're at least evangelizing from that respect. When we're talking about vulnerability management, like threat intelligence, when we see threat intelligence, we feel like it will affect us. We do that very thing that you touched on, is that we reach out to teams and say, hey, we've had this, we've had this opportunity come up. Is this something that affects you? Are we on the right version? There's a handful of things that it does for us as well as them, right? I mean, they feel engaged and feel like they're part of the security culture. Secondarily, it gives us visibility and insight into places that we may not have had that visibility and insight because we don't know what we don't know, right? And we just try to make sure that dialogue is rich. Now, back to the phishing thing. One of the things that we started doing there, which was interesting how simple this is, right? So before we send the phishing email, somebody might send it to us and say, hey, this looks like phishing, and then we just take it and go research it. So we made a point to create a nice little canned response for anybody that reports phishing emails to us. We do the research and we send them back a nice thank you paragraph, right? And to say, hey, we appreciate you making us aware of this. We appreciate you being diligent around cyber, and that's that count that we get. The folks that are reporting email, they can certainly go to their ribbon and say it's junk or phishing, but the ones that come to us directly that volume has grown significantly, and I think it's as a direct result of us kicking up the richness of that dialogue, right? Rather than just fire and forget, we actually create a conversation given an opportunity, right?
I think that is a great place to end that conversation because I don't know how, but we've run out of time. But Kevin, before we let you go, I love the quote over your shoulder, man. Teddy Roosevelt's "Man in the Arena." I think that extols the virtues of what we do in cyber because we get a lot of this like, oh, it's just this, oh, it's how hard can that be? Like, man, just play in the game.
I know we're getting on the end, Ralph, and I'll just say this last thing. So that saying, is an excerpt, obviously, right? But it has multiple meanings for me. I've been a fighter most of my life. I started training martial arts at 9, and so there's the context associated with that. I've been a jiu-jitsu guy for about a decade now, and folks, they like to sit back and armchair quarterback, and I think from a cyber perspective, from anybody like we talked about earlier, what you want's on the other side of fear. Anyone that tackles those things head on, if you're sitting in your chair watching, just shut up.
Right. Put up or shut up as the essence of that quote, right?
That's exactly right. So anyway, this has been a pleasure. I'd love to do it again. Whenever.
You had a hell of a story. So I think James and I were just kind of messaging each other back and forth as you were talking. We're like, we just let it keep going. Like this is let him keep. That's a great story. But it's funny because there's so many people that I've had on this show that have a very similar. I started as one thing, a janitor, a cook, a contractor, whatever, and suddenly you find yourself, you're like, I had an opportunity, I took it, I worked hard, and look here's what I'm doing now. And I think if nothing else, that reinforces the point that this is not a discipline you go to school, you learn, and you're good at. This is a discipline that you take some knowledge, you take a ton of curiosity, and that tenacity to just keep outpacing others, right? And just keep going. I really do see this like firefighters and police officers, and maybe not quite at that scale, because we're not those types of superheroes, right? But it takes a certain kind of person to think about the fact that you're going to be working 24/7 sometimes for long periods of time in a job that frankly nobody wants you to do because you're annoying them and you're keeping them from doing their job easily. It's a thankless job, but we do it. And it takes a special kind of person. So to that, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Well, folks, that's it. Thanks for listening. This has been another Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Before you hit end, though, go check out our LinkedIn page if you haven't signed on there yet. We've got a pretty healthy following there. Check out the YouTube page. It's in the show notes that I know all of you read, right? I'm looking at you. And then, of course, our live video streams are a lot of fun, and I encourage you to check those out. Mr. Clark, thank you so much for being on the show. James, always good to have you. And I think I hear the music, and that means it's time to go. We're out of here. We'll catch you guys another time, another place on another Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast.